We must act united to defeat the aggressor and focus all our capabilities and energy on addressing these challenges.
That likely would have pleased leaders from developing nations because they look to the industrialized world to help them adapt to our rapidly warming situation. Joining me now is the former US Vice President and climate campaigner Al Gore. His documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, won 2 Oscars in 2006, and the year later, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for sounding the alarm on our climate crisis. And he's joining me right now. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me back.
So here we are, everybody's talking, it's Climate Week, all the leaders, and what do we have? One of the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, the British Prime Minister, today decides to roll back or slow walk the UK's net zero and green energy policies. How is that possible? What does it say, actually?
Well, first of all, I'm not a citizen of the United Kingdom, and it will be for the people of the UK to decide how to react to this. But I will say on a personal basis, I find it shocking and really disappointing, of course. I think he's done the wrong thing. I've heard from many of my friends in the UK, including a lot of Conservative Party members, by the way, who have used the phrase utter disgust. And some of the young people there feel as if their generation's been stabbed in the back. I mean, it's really shocking to me. But again, this is an issue for the UK to handle.
Yeah, but you've weighed in as a global climate leader, so I want to know what you actually think as a politician and as an expert. He claims, Sunak, that this will not deter or slow down or hurt Britain's capacity to meet net zero goal by 2050. And his Home Secretary, who I'm not sure her credentials on climate knowledge, but she says we are not going to save the planet by bankrupting the British people. There are a couple things in there. Really?
Well, look, there are people who have very close relationships with the fossil fuel polluters who have learned how to deflect the blame for doing whatever the fossil fuel companies want them to do. And again, this is an issue for the UK. I'm uncomfortable not being a citizen there or speaking up in their political system. But from a global perspective, this is not what the world needs from the United Kingdom. And I hope and expect that, well, I don't know, maybe the people of the UK will bring about a change in the nation's perspective and even possibly the leadership. I don't know about that.
But you know what's interesting? The UK used to be a known global leader on all of this, so it really is a change.
Yeah.
But here I want to ask you this as well, because you know, President Biden is the only leader of one of the permanent 5 to actually be here. And I wonder what that says to you about, you know, the consensus or lack thereof, the ability in this divided world to address issues by the most powerful nations, not just the war in Ukraine, but also the climate crisis.
Well, I think that it's important to point out that there is a lot of good news. We are seeing dramatic progress in the deployment of solar electricity, wind electricity, electric vehicles. In India, 93% of all their new electricity production last year was solar and wind. 88% of all the new globally was renewables. EVs are now 20% of the new car sales and on the way up rapidly. However, in spite of that and other good news, the crisis is obviously still getting worse faster than we are deploying these solutions. In past morally based global efforts, there have been times in you know, the abolition movement, women's suffrage, civil rights in this country, and others, where the campaigners, the advocates felt discouraged and worried. But then once the underbrush is cleared away and the central issue is revealed as a choice between right and wrong, then the outcome is foreordained. And never has it been more clear. Look at what's happening around the world. I mean, every night on the TV news is like a nature hike through the book of Revelation. Look at the catastrophe in Libya made 50 times more likely by the climate crisis. And that same day, there were other catastrophes related to the climate crisis all around the world. People are waking up, and the fossil fuel companies have used their wealth and influence and political connections to slow things down, and they fight tooth and nail against anything that would reduce the burning of oil and gas and coal. And they're much better at capturing politicians than they are at capturing emissions. And you can sometimes tell when they've captured one.
Well, you have been very loud and clear about that. So what do you make, and I know you've spoken about it at COP27 in Egypt, but COP28 is going to be chaired, the president is actually one of those people. He is the UAE director of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. Now many have said, well, we have to have exactly that kind of person involved because they know what's going on and they're the ones who are responsible for all of this.
Well, they have portrayed, the fossil fuel industry has portrayed itself as a trusted source of the advice we need to solve this crisis. They're not. They have been deceiving us. Some of the largest companies have committed outright fraud for several decades. Deceiving people by pretending the crisis isn't real or that it's good for us, or pretending that they're solving it with some of these Rube Goldberg contraptions, like trying to suck it back out of the air as soon as they use the sky as an open sewer. We cannot trust them. They've spent only 1% of their revenue on anything like solar and wind and electric vehicles. They have an incentive to keep on producing more and more fossil fuels and burning it and using the sky as an open sewer. And it is hurting everyone who lives on planet Earth. And people are waking up to it, and they're demanding that we change and do something about this.
So in our democratic world, as you say, people are waking up to it. It's actually a voting issue for many young people in the United States and across the world. So what needs to be done to give that voice more power that it is actually reflected in leaders and companies like the ones you're targeting?
Well, I think that we have seen the emergence of the single largest grassroots movement in the history of the world. You saw the 75,000 people marching on it. They didn't expect anything like that here in Manhattan this weekend, and in cities and countries all around the world. It's not only young people. People are mobilizing now. I think we are getting very close to a political tipping point beyond which political leaders are going to oppose progress at their peril.
Now, going back to the idea of fossil fuels, like the chicken, or the fox in charge of the chickens. You've said what you've said about how fossil fuel companies should not be in charge of this situation because they prove themselves to not have done it. But now President Biden's climate czar, John Kerry, doesn't agree with you. He says we have to bring all those people in, in order to, yes, the attendance of industry executives is necessary to affect the change we're talking about.
Well, if this were a pro-climate athletic team, I would say he's playing a different position on the field than I am. I've heard enough and seen enough to no longer believe that the fossil fuel companies have any credibility. Every measure to cut the burning of fossil fuels locally, at the state level, national or international level, these oil and gas companies are in there fighting tooth and nail to stop, to delay, to block, and all the while pretending that they're trying to help out. They're not trying to help out. It may not be fair to expect them to solve it for us, but it is abundantly fair to ask them to stop blocking the efforts of others to solve this crisis.
And it's not just them, though, Vice President, because even a president of the United States, should he or she feel so inclined, can do the same. President Biden did the special legislation for inflation reduction, which involved a lot of payment for mitigation. But President Trump before him hacked and burned and slashed at all the American rules and regulations, actually put people in places because of their hostility to regulation. So, right or not?
Well, it is right, but there's a big contrast between, but they're not the same at all. And one of the reasons why President Biden became president was his advocacy for solutions to the climate crisis. And what he has presided over is the passage of by far the biggest and best climate legislation that any country has ever passed in history. He's done some things I don't agree with, but what he has done in a positive way far outweighs the rest. He has been a genuine leader on this issue, and the Congress passed the IRA. It's going to put more than $1 trillion into speeding up the deployment of alternative sources of energy.
And what happens if a Donald Trump comes back? We
I'm not even going to speculate on
climate,
that.
or somebody like him with those views.
I don't like to speculate on that for the same reason I don't like to watch horror movies.
So it'll be a horror.
Well, I believe in the integrity of American democracy, and I choose to believe.
You?
Yes, I do.
In terms of this issue? Because
Yeah, I do.
even, as I said, even if Congress and the others, pass certain things, an executive order or a court case could reverse them.
Well, the old Churchill cliche, it's the worst form of government ever invented, except for every other form that's been
How
tried.
badly damaged and at risk is American democracy for precisely these kinds of issues, and indeed reducing poverty and keeping democracy
Well, in
whole?
order to solve the climate crisis, we do have to pay attention to the democracy crisis. We are seeing the influence of big money playing way too big a role in the American political system, and that needs to be addressed. We have rules now that allow secret giant donations from corporations without anybody knowing where they're sending the money. That is deadly to the integrity of democracy. But I believe that the American people will set this ship right. I think democracy has more resilience than we sometimes give it credit for having.
And do you think that the Ukraine war, it was very interesting to hear President Zelensky in there talk about Libya, Morocco, talk about the climate that we've all seen all over the world this summer, and say, yeah, we actually need to solve this war in order to concentrate even more on the other,
Yeah, and Ukraine has the opportunity to be a renewable energy powerhouse. By the way, I've met with their solar developers and their wind developers, and they're connected to the European grid. They have plans to be major participants in this clean energy revolution.
Can I ask you one last question? We're all getting up in years. I'm not even going to ask you how old you are. But what about this debate over age and leadership that's swirling around President Biden, for instance?
Congratulations on your 40-year career, okay? But look, you're better than ever.
Well, there you go.
You're better than ever.
That's true.
And I think, honestly, President Biden, I think he has done an extraordinarily good job in the main. And I've learned from my own experience in the White House that the presidency is a team sport. And I think he has one of the best teams that's ever been put in place in the White House. So I'm optimistic that he's going to prevail.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Vice President Gore, thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you.
Take care. So, at the UNGA, it is as much about who isn't here, as I said, as who is. Of the 5 Permanent Security Council members, the United States, Russia, China, France, and the UK, only President Biden is the leader attending. The centerpiece of his speech was about standing with Ukraine in defense of global democracy. The growing North and global South divide, and China's evolving competition for power and its role on the world stage. Take a listen.
When it comes to China, I want to be clear and consistent. We seek to responsibly manage the competition between our countries so it does not tip into conflict. I've said we are for de-risking, not decoupling with China. We will push back on aggression and intimidation and defend the rules of the road, from freedom of navigation to overflight to level economic playing field that have helped safeguard security and prosperity for decades. But we also stand ready to work together with China on issues where progress hinges on our common efforts.
Now, Singapore and its Southeast Asian neighbors navigate a tricky middle ground in a very tense relationship between China and the United States. Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan is the Singapore Minister for Foreign Affairs, and he's joining me now. And I had written that down phonetically. Can you please Tell me your last name so I get it right again.
Balakrishnan.
Balakrishnan, there you go. I had a hyphen so I could
got
say
it
it
right.
right.
You got it right.
I want to get it right. Tell me about this then. Neither Xi Jinping nor the other permanent 5 members were here except for President Biden. How much are you feeling the pressure in your Indo-Pacific region as this sort of tempo escalates between the two powers?
Well, first thing you need to understand, Singapore's a tiny city-state, multiracial, multilingual in the heart of Southeast Asia. We feel this troubled world in a very real sense. The war in Europe is still going on, there's food and energy insecurity, climate change, the digital revolution, the promise and the risk of AI, all these things are happening. And now more than ever before, we need global leadership. The problems are beyond that of just the United States or China or Europe. In fact, it needs a whole world together. What we are seeing here at the UN now is an organization that's showing it's capable of walking and chewing gum, right? And that's why you've got to deal with all
Even
these
without
crises.
the big leaders?
Even without the big leaders, but their teams are here. And look, we live in a day and age, you can transmit messages live.
Okay. Do you believe some of the conversation around how the Russian illegal war against Ukraine is kind of sucking the oxygen out of many, many other important
I
issues?
think that was the fear last year. This year, and particularly if you look at what's happened the last 3 days, it's part of the theme. It's not gone away. It's a direct frontal assault on the UN Charter, a risk to small city-states like us. I mean, territorial integrity is sacred. But the litany of other problems, the fact that we are behind time in achieving the sustainable development goals, the fact that we're not meeting the Paris Agreement commitments, the fact that climate change with extreme weather events are a clear and present danger, all that's on
And
the
for you
front
particularly, they say, I mean, you're one of the fastest heating urban, I mean, you're a city-state.
We're a city-state,
Yeah, but
an
it's hot.
island, 1 degree north of the equator. We couldn't stand here at midday in Singapore without being completely drenched. So a world which is hotter is a world which is hostile to a place like mine.
Tell me how you navigate what I described as a rather tricky bridge between East and West at this particular time, in the Indo-Pacific.
First point, we've got great relations with the United States and with China. And it's not just a form of words. The United States is the biggest foreign investor in Singapore, also the biggest service trading partner with Singapore. China is our biggest trading partner for goods. We're a significant investor in China, as we have also investments in the United States. So for us, the best possible world is one in which the two big boys get along.
And how will they get along?
Well, that's not something you and I can wish on or impose on President Biden or President Xi. But let me just say, for someone who's been there, interacted with them, neither side is actually spoiling for a war. But the fundamental problem is a lack of strategic trust. What that means is both sides have to assume the worst of each other. And then they've got to take precautions. And then that precaution is viewed as a potential threat, and you take a counter precaution, and the danger is an escalatory spiral. Our recommendation is there needs to be a lot more direct face-to-face interaction. There is no substitute, eyeball to eyeball, handshake to handshake, and having honest-to-goodness conversations.
This apparently is going to happen at the
I hope
important
so.
meeting
I
in
hope
San
so.
Francisco.
Yes. And
What
I
are
think
your hopes for that?
that they meet, that they
What's the
engage.
best that could happen out of there?
The beginning of a real strategic conversation. If you go back, well, we're both of a certain vintage. If you go back 4 decades, you had the Soviet Union, you had the United States of America. As far as nuclear arms were concerned, they were peer powers. There was strategic restraint, there was deterrence. You could have conversations about arms limitation.
Yeah.
Today, because the situation is still evolving so rapidly, neither side has really sized each other up and said, look guys, we better put some guardrails, and not guardrails in a negative, aggressive sense, but guardrails around both of us, so we don't lose the plot. Now, that can only happen if they meet, interact, generate some strategic trust, and then get to do a few things together. And there's a lot to do together. The pandemic, climate change, AI. Do we need regulations? What about the SDGs? Can that be done without the United States and China? And the answer
And
is
yet
no.
there seems to be a hardening of the political structure in China, and most certainly the president is under very strong political pressure to sound tough on China. So I want to ask you, how seriously does your government take reports that China is trying to influence ethnic Chinese populations across Southeast Asia, including in your country, your city-state? The former permanent secretary in the ministry says, if too many Chinese Singaporeans are foolish enough to subscribe to Xi's version of the China dream, the multiracial social cohesion that's the foundation of Singapore's success will be destroyed. Once destroyed, it cannot be put together again.
Well, let me put it to you this way. Singapore's a young city-state, multiracial, multilingual. We are not Chinese, we're not Indians, we're not Malays, we're certainly not Americans. I'm confident that there is a very strong sense of a Singapore identity. We may speak different languages and different colors, but if you come to Singapore, and I hope you do,
I've been.
you will realize there is a strong sense of identity. The next point is we don't look at the world in binary terms, meaning cultural pride, linguistic proficiency, being able to understand and to appreciate opportunities both in the West and East, in India and in Europe, is a strategic advantage for us. So the fact that we understand, and therefore some people may think they have opportunities to influence us, that's baked into our cultural
So you
DNA.
detect it and you're deterring
So
it?
it is something which we need to be aware of. It is something which we take appropriate precautions on. But my fundamental point is this: I trust Singaporeans, that we put our identity, and most important, we understand what our long-term national interests are. It's not to be anybody's vassal state or proxy. The way we navigate this nexus between the United States and China is to be straight with both of them. We tell them we have our own long-term national interests. Both of you are critical to our long-term national interests. And I don't have the luxury of saying sweet nothings in Beijing and sweet nothings in Washington.
Can
so
I-
we play a constructive, honest broker.
Can I ask
role.
you a human rights question?
Yes.
Amnesty International has noted the resumption of executions in your country for non-violent crimes like drug-related offences. Last year, major criticism after the execution of a Malaysian man with a very, very, very low IQ, according to his lawyers. 5 women, first woman in 20 years executed in the summer. Why?
We are extremely draconian for drug trafficking.
Even
It
somebody
gives me-
who's barely
It gives
at
me
69 IQ?
It gives me no joy for every case that is executed for drug trafficking. But here's the rub of it. Even in the United States, the drug problem is real. Second point, if you look in my neighborhood, that's where the stuff is grown, is processed. Third point, Singapore is a place where our trading volume is 3 times our GDP. Can you imagine if we did not take a strong stand on drug trafficking, we would be a nexus, the process in which it would reach even your shores. So I take no joy in this, but I'm just making the point that we take a very, very harsh position.
I'm glad to have you on the record on this. Foreign Minister, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate you being with us.
You must come to Singapore again.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, more than just a tennis match. 50 years ago today, Billie Jean King thrashed a self-described male chauvinist pig. He was Bobby Riggs, and that was the battle of the sexes. So, on this 50th anniversary, here's Billie Jean King with a few reflections. Billie Jean King, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's great to see you and hear you, Christian.
Listen to me, this is unbelievable. This week marks 50 years since you beat Bobby Riggs in the Battle of the Sexes. Tell me if you remember, what do you remember most 50 years ago about Bobby Riggs and that match?
I remember shaking hands at the net afterwards, and he said to me, "I underestimated you." I'll never forget that because my dad used to tell my brother, my brother played Major League Baseball. He always told us to respect our opponent and never, ever underestimate them. Never. And so I just couldn't tell my dad. I said, Daddy, he said he underestimated me. Just exactly what you tell Randy and me. Never, ever do. And always respect your opponent, even if you don't like them.
I want to ask you what you think would have happened had you lost. What would have been the impact?
I think it would have been huge. We just had Title IX passed the year before, the educational amendment, which I think would have gotten weakened. There were so many things that we had not accomplished. A woman could not get a credit card on her own. I thought a little bit about if we lost, but I thought more about what we could do if we won. And I knew that we'd have a much bigger impact, and which we did. I mean, I still have people coming up to me, and the most important thing I think I've heard over the last 50 years is the impact it had on women and their self-confidence. And for the men, for the first time, many of the men thought about their daughters, and all of a sudden they said, you know what, I do want my daughter to have equal opportunity with my son. And I think it really started to change the hearts and minds of people.
So, Billie Jean, that means I have to ask you this question. I'm asking a lot of leaders about age. And I don't think it's a secret that in 2 months or so, you will be 80 years old.
Wow.
Honestly, you look like, I don't know, not a day over 50, and
Wow.
you act like an Energizer bunny. So, given all this talk about age around President Biden, given the Romney reason, as I like to say, for stepping down and not contesting another Senate race in order to give the ground to the next generation, what are your thoughts on age and leadership?
I think it depends on the person, what kind of health they're in, and what they want to do. But President Biden, if he feels good, he's had so much experience. But I think ageism is really a problem in this country, and you have to really judge each human being where they're at, not by their age.
So how about you? How does it affect you? You just don't seem to slow down.
Well, you get slower, but the main thing is stay active, be social, do what you're doing. Just stay active, go to work and have fun. But I feel great. There is no way I'm going to slow down right now.
At the US Open, Coco Gauff, the new women's champion, a teenager, thanked you for making it possible to have equal pay and for all the other things you have done. Do you see a new generation of American women and men emerging? For a long time, it was Eastern Europeans and others.
Yes, I think the Americans, we had a great US Open. And Coco, of course, we've been waiting for her to win big. And she won really big. And she is so eloquent. She's such a great athlete. She's got everything. We've known that for a long time. I listened to her at 16 years of age talk about social justice. And I went, she's the one, because she can do so much on the court, but what she can do off the court as well is going to be sensational. And she's got a good family, and her grandmother is the force. Her grandmother is the first black child that went to a white school in Florida. And so she made a huge difference as an example to her grandchild, Coco.
All that.
And I agree with everything she just said about her, because she is an extraordinary athlete. I don't know nothing about the homebody. I don't know nothing about the social, political aspect of her life, but she is an incredible athlete.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thanks a lot.
You keep in mind, whenever this woman here done what she done, was actually a deluge, a dam breaking an event, just about the time that Loretta Lynn was singing about the birth control pill, and Women's Lib had basically come to a head. And there was so many handicaps that even to this day I can think back about my own mother, about how that she suffered because they didn't have the rights, they didn't have the entitlements, they didn't have the fortitude, they didn't have the knowledge, they didn't have a lot of things that various people done without. They sacrificed. You know, throughout the baby boom era, a woman's place was supposed to have been at home. and basically to be seen and not heard. And they really had to fight their way tooth and nail to be able to get up to where they are today here in America. And the sad thing about it is, we still have countries today that are just as heathenistic and barbaric. Places over in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, I mean, they've lightened their stance up a little bit pertaining to women, but by and large, if you're over in, I think it's Libya or maybe Iran, and a woman shows her face without a veil on, or if she shows anything above her feet or her hands, she is basically treated as taboo by the officials. I mean, think about this. Whenever Afghanistan gave up its rights towards not fighting for its people, within 11 days, basically, they surrendered to the Taliban. One of the
Years
first,
since she created the World Women's Tennis Association.
one of the first things that the Taliban ordered for all women to leave their positions in government and in school. Now, they may have conformed some of that since then, but it was without a doubt that whenever the Taliban come back in power, that was one of the first things that they went after, which was the women and the women's rights. And it's really sad because we had already showed them a better lifestyle, and they wasn't willing to sacrifice for that lifestyle in showing the Taliban who was actually going to eat the cabbage and how the cabbage was going to be eaten. That's one of the reasons why that I look up to the Ukrainian people. The Ukrainian people knows what being held under that type of slavery actually does to people, and what it don't do for people. And the fact of the matter is, the Ukrainians rather die than to go back living the way that they was living under the regime of the Russian government. They had rather die than to surrender to the demands coming from the federal government, especially Putin. And to be quite honest with you, I really can't blame them. I would, if I was them, I would be in the same predicament towards believing that they would be better off dead than they would be alive. Saudi Arabia, they can say whatever they want to about trying to put on a new clean face. But the bottom line is this: there's only a selected amount of women that has to meet certain criteria to be able to drive. And I don't know that they'll ever turn full face towards allowing for women not to dress in a veil to get out into the public. Those are very, very strict policies that even to this day, just like that lady was talking about over in over in that country, I don't forgot now where he was talking about, where they're really, really strict on drug control, nonviolent crimes. At certain levels pertaining to that type of crime, you have to look at it as it being an infestation of a society. And it's the exact same thing that the Chinese went through back in the late 1800s, before World War I, that they was so impenetrated, submerged, drowned in heroin, that the only way that they could clean their streets up was to go through a mass drug genocide in digging graves and burying thousands of people on top of people just to get rid of that disease. And you have to look at drug use and the type of drug use that you're involved in towards it being a disease. I'm going to go ahead and say this publicly that I ordinarily don't talk about. But, you know, I myself right now could be on the level of being a drug addicted person pertaining to the injuries that I've had. I could have resorted towards taking pain medication on top of pain medication on top of pain medication to the point that it would basically have already destroyed either my liver or my heart. The fact of the matter is, I only have one kidney. Because I have only one kidney, I'm caught in between a hard place and a rock whenever it comes to taking pain medication. I can only stay within the confounding guidelines of taking, first of all, certain pain medications, and secondly, if I exceed over the limit of that pain medication, then I take a strong chance on damaging my only kidney, which would basically put me on a dialysis machine. So whenever it comes to me dealing with the pain, I really have to be conscientious about what I put into my body and how I deal with the pain. And that's one of the reasons why that I went ahead and scheduled for an operation to be done on my left ankle. That if the truth be known, they probably should have went ahead and fused both ankles, because I've had a burden amount of time to go through endless pain after pain after pain, day after day after day, pertaining to the left ankle, that they basically, the doctor said that he took both his hands and cuffed them together in placing the shattered ankle back together again, hoping for the best. I've went through so much misery over that left ankle, to the point if they would have just went ahead and fused it like they did the right ankle, I'd probably be up and going and probably be just as self-sustainable as anybody else. I have had to resort to other means pertaining to pain. That I just got off the phone a while ago with a company called Zenex, ZYNEX, that has these devices now that they can put these patches on various areas that you hurt in, and it can bring stimulation to the nerves that will actually open up door phones into your brain that will help to fight the pain that way. And then they got the machine set up to where you can go to another setting to where it don't actually motivate the door phones in your brain, but what it does, it stimulates the nerve endings to the point that it becomes confusing to the brain, that it don't recognize how severe that the pain actually is. I mean, whenever you have to resort to either getting injections, you know, I want to limit myself and trying to get a cortisone shot no closer together than about 6 months apart. Whenever you have to resort to getting cortisone shots, ankle injections, our knee injections, our hip injections, that some people has to do this sometimes as much as every 30 days. And no matter what machine that you hook up to, it's still going to resort in the same problem pertaining to pain. Well, then the next best thing is to go in and do a knee transplant or a hip transplant or fusing the ankle or maybe even an ankle replacement, etc., etc. I think the way that I understand about the ankle fusing, they have better success out of the fusing than they do the ankle replacement, because there's so much pressure on that particular item. You know, I'm pretty sure that they could probably give me a stainless steel ankle and embrace it with some sort of whatever that they put in there, but it wouldn't last. It wouldn't be a permanent fix. And to be quite honest with you, it makes me feel very uncomfortable with anxiety of knowing that I'm fixing to have to go through this again and having my left ankle fused. But at this point in time, because of the way that the state government in Kentucky poisoned me by putting me on Risperdal and causing me to go from 220 to basically 300 and almost 70 pounds in just a little bit of time, the weight load, without even being overzealous in doing whatever, has been overwhelming to that left ankle, and it's been tough dealing with the pain. I guess whenever I first noticed that my ankle was starting to play out was in 2006, whenever I wound up walking down the C&O Canal for about 70 miles. I think the C&O Canal is like 150 miles long. But in the process of me walking, I wore out 3 wagons, 3 trailers that I was pulling with all my supplies. But whenever I was going through Papaw's Tunnel, I busted an ankle. I busted a axle in the degree that I had to push the wagon back through Papaw's Tunnel backwards, and the tunnel itself is like a quarter of a mile. Very dark, very strenuous. I had a bad axle, and basically it put so much strain on that left ankle. That's whenever I began to see a negative reaction pertaining to putting too much strain on the ankle. Since then, it's been different times that it is responding and reacting in different ways, mostly in a negative way. But last year, whenever it got cold in the wintertime, I was going through so much excruciating pain that even a cortisone shot would not spare the pain. At that time, I didn't have this Xanax medical device that puts out electronical pulsating stimulating to the nerves. I didn't have that at the time, which may have helped, but it still wouldn't have been a fix-all. But so many people has to deal with pain today, and they deal with pain in the wrong way. They deal with pain towards taking entirely too many pain meds, which in a sense will cause other problems, to cause other organs to either be damaged or break down to the point of destroying. And the older you get, the more than likely, I don't care how top-notch that you are, I don't care how many exercises you do, I don't care how much good food you eat, the older you get, the more apt that certain organs are going to start failing. Usually, it's your eyes and your ears at first. Then, as you get older, you see these people that's all cankered over. They can't hardly stand up straight. Well, the reason why is because all the vertebra displacements that has now basically been worn out in their back and their hips and their shoulders, to the point that they really can't hardly sit up straight because their body is basically worn out. That's the reason why you see people that's all bent over the way that they are, because they're going through so much pain. It's unbearable. So hopefully, after I go through what I got to go through this fall and this winter, hopefully I can get back up to par. Hopefully I can get back on my feet. Hopefully I can go back into my walking process towards exercising and helping also get some of this weight off. Now, this year I've done very, very well. So far within the past 2 years, I'm down to basically 318 pounds. So I've lost approximately over 50 pounds, and that's a good thing. But I feel my best at around 200. So I'm still like 120 pounds shy of where I ought to be or where I need to be, especially dealing with so many injuries. So if people that do happen to get a hold of this particular video that I'm putting out, I just pray to God that they will pray for me in response towards getting back on my feet and hopefully becoming more of a percentage on top than rather than where I am right now. It's tough whenever you get old. It's tough whenever you get worn out. It's tough whenever you get weight on you. On top of that, it's tough to be able to, in some cases, even put your own shoes on. Clothe yourself takes like twice as long. Stuff that you didn't think about whenever you was growing up that you took for granted. Now all of a sudden, you're feeble. Your maneuverability ain't near as good. You got to go at stuff in a whole lot slower pace to make sure that you don't either over exhilarate yourself or the next thing you know, wind up losing your footing and falling. I mean, there's just so many different areas that you don't think about whenever you're young that will basically slap you in the face as you get older. It's kind of like whenever I bought a wheelchair from Walmart. I guess it was about 3 months ago. It was on sale. I thought I got a pretty good deal on it. I probably could have taken it to the insurance company, but rather than go through all the paperwork and the headache, I just went in and bought it myself. But as I was buying the unit, they had to bring somebody over to pick it up for me and take it out. I said something to him about the wheelchair, and he looked at me. The guy looked at me and said, well, you know what? This is something that we're all going to have to look forward in using one day if we live long enough. And I thought to myself whenever he said that, what truer words? What truer words? There's very few people that has the esteem and the physical ability like Billie Jean had to be able to be 80 years old and to be top notch, still going physically, emotionally, mentally. There's very few people that climax into that arena like that. Don't get me wrong, it's not impossible. I've seen people that was in their 90s, in their mid 90s, that had more freaking energy than a freaking teenager. More spunk, good with their mind. They were just sharp at that age. So it's not all about the genes. It's not all about the age per se whenever it comes to running for president and being top notch. I mean, we got people today that are dying in their 20s because of whatever reasons. So you can't be prejudiced against age just because of somebody being old. You know, whenever I was growing up as a young kid, this was either in the 60s or early 70s. People actually was prejudiced against people that wore glasses. They was prejudiced against people that needed cheaters. Today, 50 years later, you got kids that want to wear glasses even if they don't need glasses because now it's the hip thing to do. It's the hip thing to have. See how things change? See how things alternate or evolve? And it can evolve just as quickly as being for the good as it can evolve towards it being for the bad. Now we're fixing to finish this up on this climate presentation that hopefully God, I pray every day that not only the people in the state of Tennessee, but the people all over the planet will recognize what is happening pertaining to the signs. Because these are all the trademarks that Jesus Christ talked about in his advisories, in his warnings, to prepare yourself for the inedible whenever that ye shall start to see these things occurring, to know that we are at the doors. Now, you can contradict me all you want, okay? You can contradict me pertaining to my testimony. You can contradict me about all the injuries that I've had. You can contradict me even whenever I tell you about some of the procedures that I got to go through, the barriers to make sure that I don't go above and beyond that line of possibly damaging my only kidney and winding up on a dialysis machine, you can contradict the things that I say about the government poisoning me up in Kentucky. But you cannot continue to contradict what we're doing to the planet of remaining climate deniers. And whenever I talk to people that come up with this ideology the way that they do, kind of like the individual, and I like Bob, I like him to death. He lives up in Minnesota. I met him in New Mexico. He's a very smart individual. He works for, or he did work for the fire and rescue. He was also involved in being an investigator towards people that was purposely putting stuff on fire. And me and him has grown attached to one another since I met him in 2013 in New Mexico. So we've had like a 10-year relationship talking to one another. But he's still convinced that because of the pressures in the center of the earth, it's actually squeezing or developing, manufacturing crude oil because of the pressures. To me, that's insanity. That's absolutely insanity. I realize that the pressures in the center of the earth has bound to be unbelievable amount of pressures. I mean, we know this just by going into a submarine a mile deep into the ground, a mile deep into the water, and a submarine blowing up. We just seen that this year pertaining to a very, very wealthy individual that went through what he went through by basically the whole submarine that they was in basically imploded. We know that the pressures are strong, but to bring up a theory that because of the pressures is what's creating the oil is absolutely, to me, absurd. Now, he did bring it up to me pertaining to the globe that basically has encased even the lower atmosphere up into the upper atmosphere, and because of it, it's holding the heat into the seismosphere or whatever word that they use, which is basically the second atmosphere above the clouds. Some of that to me makes sense because we're putting something up into the air that is not normal. It's not natural. And because of it, there's going to be repercussions towards the upper atmosphere, the stratosphere, that's the word I was looking for, the stratosphere becoming much, much hotter. And because it becomes much hotter, the moisture content can go higher. Because the moisture content goes higher, it also holds more moisture. But whenever it releases it in the form of a deluge pertaining to all these rains. That part I can accept. But the part about the cows farting, about aerosol cans, R134 versus R12, I don't accept that. God has showed me that oil was put in the ground for a reason. And it wasn't so that we could drive around on Sunday with our top down and our cool little glasses and acting like Mr. Cool in the neighborhood or the area. That oil was put there for lubrication purposes because of the platelets constantly shifting, going up, down, over, in, out, whatever. Matter of fact, they just had one of the biggest underwater volcanoes that has erupted just within the past decade, just recently, within the past week. I don't forgot now where it was, but it was a big, big underground volcano. We're seeing that now on probably a 300 to 400% margin of it increasing, not decreasing. You can go into places of the ocean, going into the abyss that's like 5 or 6 miles deep, maybe even deeper, to where the deeper that you go, the hotter the water gets. So what are we doing? We are destroying the planet. We are eliminating something that was put there for the planet's protection, which was a shield. As the shield is getting thinner, now the heat is accelerating because the shield is not there, and now it's coming in areas, and the quickest areas that it's going to come out of is going to be areas like the bottom of the oceans. But there's also areas like Yellowstone National Park or the Hawaiian Islands. They claim that was one of the reasons why that the Hawaiian Islands was so hot and dry this year. It wasn't the fact that they wasn't getting their regular rains. It wasn't the fact that they wasn't getting their dews. They was getting all the above, but it was getting hotter. And I personally believe, this is just my theory, I can't prove this, but whenever we have dews today that are adequate to a rain, to the point that the farming industry cannot even get into their fields until long about 10:30, 11 o'clock because the wind wasn't blowing and we wound up having a heavy dew, I tend to wonder if that is because of the planet heating up and the moisture is escaping into our atmosphere, and then it drops back down in the form of dew. Now you can say whatever you want to say, but whenever I can look across that bottom down there, which is probably about 100 feet lower than where I am right here, and I realize the trees and I realize the vegetation, they're going to hold more moisture because of them being green and etc. But whenever you see an intense fog that basically comes out of nowhere, almost like it comes out of the ground, similar to what you see in places like Yellowstone or in other close volcanic activities, you have to start to wonder what is actually going on below our feet. And you know, the scientist has always believed, and I don't mean to be no scientist, but I put science, Bible, and 4 or 5 other things together to come up with my conclusion. But you have to ask yourself a question whenever it comes to the water content warming up the way that it's warming up and the ice melting the way that it's melting, where are we going to be, the direction that we're heading into right now, 10, 15 years from now, if we do not change this, whenever the ice can no longer resist against the forces of the heat, which is the forces of the heat is an energy of itself. The forces of the cold is an energy of itself. Whenever the forces of the cold can no longer combat against the forces of the heat, that means that the heated water is going to exceed even that much further pertaining to the melting of the ice. Eventually, once it melts so much that there's no resistance against the heat, then the oceans will start drying up, similar towards how ponds, reservoirs, lakes, rivers, water systems, aqueducts, etc., has basically started evaporating. Because whenever you look at the steam, or the fog, or the dew, you have to look at it in the same sense as you would by taking a pot of water and putting it on an eye of a stove and heating the stove up. The less heat that's involved in the warming of the water that's on top of the eye is going to be less evaporation. But the hotter that you turn the heat up, guess what happens? It evaporates like twice as fast, 3 times as fast, maybe 10 times as fast, depending upon how hot that you got it. That's basically what I can foresee that's happening to the planet Earth right now, is that we are warming up from the inside out. We are basically walking and talking on a ticking time bomb because of what the OPEC petroleum tycoon industries have done by turning their heads and acting pleading insanity, basically, or acting like that all this stuff was just a bunch of hokey pokey BS, knowing good and well that it had already been foreseen by certain scientists going back even 50 plus years ago, of certain people that already knew that what we was doing to the planet from the inside out was going to have serious ramifications. Al Gore is one of those people that listened, watched, looked, put all the dots together, and not just 1 or 2 of them, But if you engage that with the prophecies of the Bible that Jesus talked about, that as we shall see the days approaching, indicating that we will be able to see them, tangibly see them, that no flesh shall be saved, but for the elect's sake whom he has chosen, those days would be shortened. We are heading down a cliff. And it's not just a cliff pertaining to the American cliff. We are heading in the direction towards doom and gloom to our planet. And what we're seeing right now is the very things that Jesus talked about, that it would be as a woman travailing pertaining to the birth pains. These are signs that we are getting closer to the very end of the days. Now, whenever I put that little cartoon character painting that Mr. Woody painted for me before I wound up going to LaGrange Mental Institution and being studied by the state of Kentucky, being ordered under the pretense of Judge Woodall in Cadiz, Kentucky. That man looked at me whenever he seen that cartoon character. I guess he didn't have no type of humor about him at all. But whenever he looked at the sign and he looked back at me, he said, "The end of what?" Because the sign that the cartoon character was holding, the end is near. And I looked at him, I said, "The end of the world." And because I said that, and because this guy couldn't put two and two together, he immediately said, "I think you're delusional and delirious, and I'm going to order for you to be put on this medication." And I explained to him, "Doc, they apprehended me, and I didn't do nothing wrong. I did not break no laws. I did not break no violations of no laws. I was making about $2,000 a week. I go, you need to let me go so I can go back to Oklahoma and start paying Oklahoma taxes as well as federal taxes." He said, "Well, you ain't going to do that." I said, "Well, I ain't taking your medicine." And he said, "Well, you just give me about 72 hours and I'll show you how the cow's going to eat the cabbage." So what did he do? He gets on the phone. They fill out the proper paperwork in Cadiz, Kentucky, pertaining to Judge Woodall. And less than about 3 days later, the doctor comes in there with a stack of paperwork where Judge Woodall had electronically sent the paperwork back over to the doctor's office, saying that if I did not take that medication voluntarily to strap me on a gurney, and if they had to cram it up my rectum, because I was going to take Risperdal regardless whether I liked it or not. At that point in time, knowing that I had not been violent, knowing that I had not perceived towards being violent in any form or fashion, towards being hostile in any way, at that point in time, I realized that I'm no longer in America. This is the same thing that happened to the people over in Germany pertaining to the Gestapo powers that was in power at the time, before the pressures become so unreal on Hitler that he wound up having to take his own life. But I felt just as a young girl who would tell her assailant or her monster that's trying to rape her, "No, no, no, please don't do that, please don't do that," and you're going ahead and going in and doing it anyway. That is third world tyrant communism, territorial type rule. And whenever doctors and judges and attorneys start using those same tactics based upon them being biased, based upon they don't agree with what that person's teaching or preaching or talking about, based upon whatever, then they are creating malice behavior against our own Constitution. And the reason why I know this is because even Ronald Reagan in the early 80s, especially after he got a shot by Hinckley and almost died of an assassination attempt, it was his wife that recognized some very, very serious matters that at that time was going on here in America. And one of the biggest features that she was strong about was illiteracy, people that couldn't read. And the other thing that they talked about at that time that was on the front burner was mental health. That it was drowning in America cost at that time pertaining to all the mental health psychiatric wards that was basically holding people there, but yet no, they had never promoted any type of violent behavior whatsoever. And that's whenever Ronald Reagan ordered for those people to be discharged and put out on the streets. So I know without a doubt that my rights got violated. Especially, well, they've gotten violated again and again and again. There's so many times that they've been violated, I can't even pronounce it all in a sentence within 5-minute time. But the last time that I got majorly violated, other than what happened here in Weakley County, of my brother and I being concerned about some children across the road, that basically after my brother died, the judge knowed that I did not get the paperwork, or I did not get any type of order from my attorney of knowing when the arraignment was coming up, even though it was my brother and I that had requested for that type of arraignment. Now, it gives them the power to basically come in here and do whatever that they want to do in whatever way that they want to do it. And of course, whenever you got somebody on their high horse like Johnson at the time, that was the prosecuting attorney in this area, oh, he thought he had him a trophy. He thought he had him a trophy model pertaining to Dennis James Jackson that I'm sure he's read about and studied about and listened to and talked about and discussed probably, I'm going to say, 1/10 of his life since he's moved from Arkansas over to Tennessee. I'm going to put it that way. Because he thought that I was either a madman, somebody that was crazy, or he wanted to automatically put me in the category like Tommy Moore wanted to put me in the category towards not me being of the white horse, but of the black horse. Well, those was the very lies that they spread about me here in Northwest Tennessee, in Obion County and Weakley County, and that was one of the obstacles that my brother and I was running into pertaining to all these people that was hunting us, gunning us down, that was deliberately making our lives miserable by tormenting us on a day-to-day, everyday level that the courts in Weakley County knew about, and they sat back and let it occur. Not only did they let it occur, but there towards the last, their final blow was, let's go get Juby. We can't arrest all of Hop-In and Cydonia because there's more of them than there is Juby. We can't put all them in jail. But what we can do, we can turn the tables and we can go and arrest Juby. Because Juby didn't make his court date. Not putting under consideration that my brother had just died, and not putting under consideration, especially whenever Bruce Brown stood in front of Judge Pence and told him Mr. Jackson was not aware of his arraignment trial, Your Honor. And they still pursued a backwoods method towards wanting to attack me. Now, you wonder how come that they drove me off into a state of even a deeper depression towards me trying to commit suicide while I was in Weakley County Jail? They drove me to that. Because at that point in time, I was already grieving tremendously over my brother dying. In addition to how the neighborhood around here was responding and reacting to my brother dying. Between the whole mixture of all of it, I wanted to die. I didn't no longer want to be around these heathens, around these barbarians, and around these evil demonic monsters. I just wanted to end my life and go on to the next life. Because I felt like that this life had become hell. And I still believe that this life is hell. And I still believe about 1/3 of the people that I'm living around down here are nothing more than monsters. They're evil. And they're disguised. They're basically imitators towards trying to disguise themselves as being good, and ain't nothing about them good. They're either alcoholics, winos, tramps, prostitutes, whores, whoremongers, warmongers, dope addicts, or dope sellers. And to think that I come back to Northwest Tennessee after me being raised up in the 60s and the 70s, knowing how outlandishly the drug use and the alcohol use was, to think that I come back here and the problems was even more severe than what they was whenever I left here back in the mid 80s, especially whenever I started working for the public in the late 80s, and I worked 5 years in Milan, Tennessee, and then I worked 10 years in Jackson, Tennessee. I basically I didn't lose complete total contact of the neighborhood, but I lost, probably 90% of the contact in the neighborhood, because at that time I had my own life. I was either living there, or I was living in Jackson, or I lived about a 2-year term in Lexington, Tennessee, up towards Juneau Bargington Road. And then I lived another 7 or 8 years on the road, basically traveling around from town to town, the state to state, being basically a catastrophic follower. I hate to use the word tornado storm chaser, because whenever you mention storm chaser, people automatically think, well, he's out here filming tornadoes. No, I don't film tornadoes. Matter of fact, whenever I see a tornado, I try to get in the safer area. Just like I don't like snakes. I don't like to be around snakes. If you got a snake, I don't care if it's in a box. I really don't even want it in the room with me. If I see a tornado, or if it's a chance that there's a tornado, I'm going to seek shelter. I'm going to try to preserve my life rather than deliberately be careless with my life. But you can be driven to a state of depression. And then you can even go beyond the state of depression towards being driven to the point of wanting to die. And that's exactly what the courts in Weakley County, Tennessee are guilty of. And it just didn't begin there whenever I come back here in 2014, from 2014 to 2017. But you got to look at the whole span of my lifetime, of every time that I come out with my message, how many people was against my message and what they was willing to do to stop the messenger because of the message. And that's exactly what I went through. And basically, I was being judged off of me being just as violent as the content of the material that I was preaching on, pertaining to Revelations. And I had to prove them wrong. But even though I proved them wrong, and even though I know that because of God, I have won this trial this endless trial for the past 30 plus years that I've went through, it has had a profound effect upon my physical status, and probably, if the truth be known, it's probably had a profound effect upon my mental status. I've never been harmful other than being harmful to myself. But you can be driven to that most psychiatrists would tell you that is a key element towards people committing suicide. Marvin Alexander is a good example of that right here in Weakley County, Tennessee. He deliberately, purposely shamed his son to the point that he didn't just discipline his son, but he disciplined his son in front of his peers, and he basically wore his ass out. And his ass may have needed wearing out. I'm not saying that it didn't. But there is a right way and a wrong way about doing things that obviously the majority of these people down here in Northwest Tennessee don't either recognize or don't give a shit about. And I hate to be so blunt about it, but they have literally caused people to become dope fiends. They have literally caused people to lose their freaking minds and commit suicide. And one day, those people that have engaged in this type of activity towards causing people to do that, kind of like right up the road in 1966 or 67, whenever Stanley Bird's sister committed suicide because the person across the road was agitating and aggravating her about it because of incest. Basically pushed her over the edge to the point of her committing suicide. She actually committed suicide. It was really the first suicide that I've ever witnessed. She was sitting on the outhouse whenever she committed suicide. Took a snub-nosed 22 and put to her head. Put it into her temple of her head and pulled the trigger. That's sad. That's sad that people wasn't aware that incest at that point in time was not only morally wrong, but was scientifically wrong as far as the gene pool not mixing right. But it was even that much wronger in the fact that somebody was across the road that was ridiculing her, that basically ridiculed that poor soul into her death. What the hell is wrong with people that are willing to do this, just like the bunch of people that come out here within hours after my brother had died, blaming me for my brother's death? I was having sex with my brother. I was a pedophile. I caused my brother's death, rather than them be sympathetic because my brother had died. They was ridiculing me over it. And today, I still have yet to get any apology from the courts or any apology from the devils and the monsters that was creating that type of atmosphere. And it would have tickled them pink if I would have committed suicide. That would have made their day. Oh, we see there, we told you, old Jimmy, he was crazy, wasn't he? The only thing wrong with Juby is the fact that the Christian society did not like my message. And because they didn't like my message, they basically either allowed or they themselves sicked the wolves on me in trying to stop the messenger, thinking that they was going to stop the message. So whenever I see stuff like I'm looking at right here pertaining to climate change, it saddens me. It deeply, profoundly saddens me. But at the same time, I can look back and say, 90 boo-boo, you brought it upon your damn selves because you didn't listen. You was hard-headed. And now you brought this pain and injury not just into your lives, but now you brought it into the lives of the innocent, pertaining to our children and our children's children, our grandchildren. And what type of environment are they going to have to be exposed to? In addition to inheriting all this indebtedness, in addition to inheriting all these drug problems, in addition to inheriting all these illegal immigrants coming over to America, I could go on and on and on about how sorry that individuals truly are that has caused disruptions in my life. Let's listen to the rest of this. I gotta go.
And that to allow more resources to be spent on climate might sound too good to be true, but it's not impossible. The small country of Belize did just that in 2021.
We refinanced 550 million, so the entirety of Belize's foreign commercial debt, generating 180 million of savings towards marine conservation, allowing the country to credibly protect 30% of its ocean.
Replicating the success of tiny Belize on a global scale will present new challenges, of course. Experts from the IMF and the private sector believe debt for climate swaps are not the only strategy, but can be a powerful instrument for mid-income countries looking to make their climate adaptation more efficient.
These debt for nature swaps are not supposed to be a panacea for those kind of underlying debt problems. Nobody should embark on debt swaps simply because they think they're going to be able to reduce their debt or...
This week, calls to address climate change took center stage at the UN, and even its largest donor promised to create new partnerships to reach sustainable development. Who will foot the bill, however, remains uncertain. Stefano Pozzebon, CNN, Bogotá.
Well, staying with climate change and my conversation with Anna regarding Prime Minister Rishi Sunak scaling back on green policies, I want to play a little clip from one former US politician reacting to that decision by Mr. Sunak.
Well, first of all, I'm not a citizen of the United Kingdom, and it will be for the people of the UK.
We've done seen this. This is already a repeat right here. I just want to say good luck to all of us. I'm really surprised that they put police on there, because police is basically an enemy to America. They don't cooperate with none of the American authorities. And basically, it's a country over there in South America, just south of Panama Canal, probably about, I don't know, probably right at 1,000 miles. That most people that are running from the law go to here in America. And the reason why they go there is because it's a crime syndicate run country, just like Colombia or any of those other places down there in Mexico, where it's a drug cartel run syndicate country. And they're basically an enemy to America, because they will not cooperate on an international scale pertaining to fugitives. And that's the reason why so many people go there. Just in case you didn't know that, I thought I'd inform you about that area. But basically, you're looking at Cancun, Mexico, like 2,000 miles down towards the equator, that they're recognizing the problems in their oceans pertaining to corals and etc. The evidence is so obvious that I don't even see how a blind person could not see this, metaphorically speaking. But you still have people to this day that want to be climate deniers. Just like you still have people today that want to be juvie deniers. Just like you still have people today that still want to be election deniers. You got rebels in the world that are purposely going up against everything and anything because they're troublemakers. They're troublemakers, and they could care less about the truth. And whenever you present the truth to them, like I told you a while ago, they're basically imposters. They can cover up themselves all they want. They can wear all the nice shiny clothes and jewelry. They can put on the smelly stuff and make themselves smell real good and look real good and talk real good. But deep down inside, they're wretched. I'm wretched myself, pertaining to me having to fight my own demons, pertaining to my own sins. The only difference is I am honest enough with myself and honest enough with others to admit to my faults. You take these people like Donald Trump, they don't admit to their faults. Even though they know that they got faults. Even though they know that they have inadequacies in their lives, they refuse to acknowledge any of the bad in their lives. And the reason why I know this is because I lived with one for years and years and years, pertaining to James Robert Jackson. That very few times I ever heard him humble himself and apologize. And that was usually something that he got caught red-handed in, and he knew that he wasn't going to be able to deny what that had occurred or why it had occurred. And that's the way with most demons. Most people that's got demons in them, they're just like Jesus said. They're murderers. They was murderers from the beginning. They're liars. They're out to kill, steal, and destroy. And they are our Christian adversaries. Thanks again for listening. Good luck to all of us. And shalom.